Welcome to Small Steps. My name's Seth Potts and I want to show you the basics of slicers in Excel. So what are slicers? Slicers in Excel are buttons that allow you to filter tables or pivot tables. I have kind of a end result like example here of just some auto theft over a couple years, just some sample data with some of these buttons. So this is kind of what a product would look like. You can make it as robust and complicated. You could add multiple charts and pivot tables. You can actually do multiple tables like this and connect as long as they're in the same source data. You can have these filter buttons that will update all of them at the same time. Just to show you real quick, you can click on the years up here and you see it'll change and filter both of these at the same time, and you can keep going with those. You can choose one item or multiple. So these slicers are basically these filtering buttons. So once we get into it here, I'm going to show you just the basics of slicers and where you can find them, how to add them, and we'll go from there. So as I mentioned, the slicers work with tables and pivot tables. I know most of the time your data is going to come in just rows and columns and not in an actual table. So if you're going to work off of the table and you want the slicers and those filter buttons to update the table itself, easiest way to change your data into a table is click anywhere in that block of data that you have, go to the Insert tab up here, and you can click on Table, and it will convert into an actual table. It looks kind of like this. It'll typically have this kind of formatting. Sometimes it's green, blue, whatever it automates to. It'll look kind of like this. If you're going to use a pivot table, there's no need to change any formatting on that. It could just work off the pivot table as is. If you're going to use the pivot table, that's what you're going to use your slicer buttons to update. You don't need to change your base data over here into a table first. You can just work straight off that pivot table. So we'll work off this pivot table here. So the two locations where you can find the slicer buttons, one is on that Insert tab, and there is a filter section over here and a button for slicers. And the other is when you're clicked in the pivot table or the table itself, they'll pull up a special menu up here. Since we're in the pivot table, it's pivot table analyze, and it has that same filter section here, and you can just click on that button there. Now what that does is it pulls up a menu of what slicers you can add. One thing I do like about the pivot table versus the standard table is you can kind of change some groupings and make your own categories. If I was doing this straight off that table, the report date actually would give me just individual dates. It wouldn't give me the option for this years or quarters. That is done in the pivot table itself in grouping. So have the years here, and you just check which items you want. And when I did that, this report date filters down to month. So year, make, model, color. You can click as many or as few of these as you want. A lot of times I'll click all of them and then just decide after that what's useful and what's not. Let me move all these out of the way here. Oh, let me get those here. And that is the problem when you get a lot of these. They kind of stack weird, and you have to go separate them out. I'm not going to make it pretty right now, but just to show. So now I have these filter buttons that are connected into this pivot table, and they pretty much, I mean, as you'd expect, they just filter out the data. So if I just wanted 2022 from that year, I could click that and it'll filter that down. If I wanted to go even further and say in 2022, how many Chevys have we had stolen, and you can see it filters it down for you like that. So the buttons that are on top here, pretty simple. Say you've clicked a few things and you want to clear that back off. That top right is clear filters. You have to click that on each. This other button is to multi-select. So if I wanted to let's say I've clicked in on one and it's like, well, I want to expand that out. I can click that and I can choose multiple options. The other way of doing that is pretty familiar. You can hold control and select individual items to add to it. In the same way that would work with the shift key, you can also hold shift and down and it'll do a whole range of that. So that's how you get the buttons on here, and just the basic functionality of selecting them and how it updates the table. So on this next video, we'll go a little more into the details of how to add multiple sources, so multiple pivot tables or charts and graphs. We'll add some of that and do a little formatting. If you found this tutorial helpful and would like to see more, click like and subscribe. Next video coming up is going to be over formatting and adding multiple connections to the slicers.